It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. Guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
Alrighty, welcome to the Good Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcast podcasted at its most hopeful bi-monthly from a kitchen bench in Kingsland, Auckland, New Zealand. I've done the obligatory fallback, as this, after all, is a hobby, so I haven't put up an episode for a month. But had a number of nibbles this weekend. 3 of 4 fell through. 4 came on in yesterday. Thank you, Mr. Dave Benge. Chat a little bit more about that man in a second, and then I'll chat to that man for 120 times 60 seconds. I'm not going to restart this today, this intro, if it goes bad, because it's 8:40 on a Tuesday morning, and I need to go in and teach audio stuff to communication students. Not audio dedicated students, comm students. So a little bit of mic technique this morning for the old point and shoot H1s. They're kind of like, if it was analogous to a camera, they're sort of a high end point and shoot. They're not when you get into your sort of SLR-esque portable recorders with kind of detachable multi-directional mics and so on. Nope, these are just sort of hit the button and stick it in someone's gob. So that's good, teaching somewhere that's a balance of theory and practice, knowing that your tutor's practicing a bit of recording before going to work. Goodness, if I was at Auckland Uni, I'd be reading a paper on the effect of psychoacoustics in applied areas. Could have got a better name for that paper. I think the gags still work, though. Not going to start this take again because I need to go to work soon. Pinball comp. Last time I checked in with you fellas, I had Max, the brewery, had organised a pinball competition throughout their bars. Many of you all know I sort of play in private homes. People have invited me in graciously, considering I don't own any machines. So it's normally a sort of a friends and family bring a plate kind of an affair, but this was quite public, and there was a crowd of young, beautiful people, and lots of free liquor flowing, and small tacos. But mainly, really what I should talk about rather than the catering was the placings. I was lucky enough to get into the finals. I think we started with about 8 of us, and then, oh my gosh, lo and behold, I was 1-on-1 with New Zealand's number 1 player, a man who competes overseas, which the rest of us don't. And curiously, the man who had organised with Max to hire all his machines to them for the night. So there was arguably a home advantage there in terms of sort of bringing in your Optimus Prime and everyone playing with your Optimus Prime, and then you winning the Optimus Prime competition, and then packing down your Optimus Prime and going home. So the winner he's actually a good mate. Dave is off to Max. He's off to USA to compete in a pinball comp. It's not unusual for him, but this time Max are paying for it in the hotel rooms and stuff. But bloody hell, I came second. It was quite fun playing in front of a crowd. I put earplugs in. It gets a bit high pressure when you've got an MC who makes up a nickname for you while you're atop the silver ball. Dave and I chat for up to about an hour and 25, so I'll try and wrap on up this intro shortly. We chat Christianity, family, New York, Tauranga, and Shihad, amongst other things. And depending, I've sort of got to know my interview or conversation style, I suppose, because I always say to people, it's a conversation you're privy to, not necessarily an interview. But on occasions, it's been constructive feedback, except for the arsehole who just put an anonymous comment up telling me I was shit and didn't listen. People have constructively said similar, that occasionally I need to let the guests' ideas breathe a little more. And I've worked out based on where I'm at on each show. It's quite a psychological self-evaluation. Listening back to your podcasts, I've decided that sometimes I'll be a little not snappy like angry snappy, but talk over snappy if I'm a little worried the guest won't open their mouth and media will necessarily spew forth. It certainly did with Dave, and we know each other well enough from years ago that it was very, very comfortable. But I was a little bit sort of free jazz, a little bit sort of around his comments. So perhaps when I listened back, I thought a couple of the points he made or stories he told he could have perhaps been left to. When I got into the radio game, they said don't never point out what you think's going wrong and no one will notice. So I've just broken that rule, but it's not radio, it's podcasting. So don't listen for that. Just pretend I never said that. That's a little bit better because I'm not starting again this intro. Hey, like the show, even though the episodes has been about a month between episodes, a bunch of strangers have liked it on Facebook, which is fantastic. A slow build. That's all I ask, really. That's the payment these days, isn't it? A social media like or a share. I still feel like not enough people share apps and stuff. I get private messages and stuff, but please, sharing's, it's publicity for me, essentially. I haven't invested any money into promo for this yet. I always thought maybe I should drop some Facebook promo dosh, but not really any need to as it's a hobby. I'm just sort of keen to see how it goes, organically. Although if another dear patron, two or three patrons essentially paid for the next year of web subscription last year, if some dear patron wants to drop me a squid or two on the donate button on the verbalhighs.com website, I'll put that towards paid promo. There you go. So yes, like the show, Verbal Highs Podcast on Facebook, Verbal Highs on Twitter, the aforementioned website, verbalhighs.com. You can subscribe at all your usual podcast vendors. And if you're on iTunes, give it a star rating, mate. Give it a star rating out of 4 or 5. Okay. This is Dave. Nice to catch up, Dave.
This is Dr. Tannen's Verbal Highs.
That's very timely. I just last night was thinking, it's near the end of the tax year, and you probably live like me and have, a bit of withholding, a bit of, main income, a bit of this, a bit of that. And I was looking at what I was earning even 6 years ago and going, how did I do it? But you just do it, don't you?
Yeah, you somehow get through. And the other flip side to that is that
smell of an oily $5 latte.
Yeah. Well, the flip side to that though is that as you earn more money, it still doesn't. You don't feel like your life's changed at all. I'm not like everything's sweet now. I'm like, where does it go?
No, that's right. I mean, I was never under the impression that money buys happiness. But it's funny. I'll tell you one thing where I noticed that is I don't know how long you kept up cigarette smoking, but I've just been hopeless, and I've really only cracked it properly in the last 3 months. I actually have not had one in the last 3 months, and that
makes a big difference.
Well, this is the thing, bro.
It doesn't.
Well, no, but this is it. So I have, because I'm useless with money, I have one account that's really hard to get to outside of certain hours, and so I sort of give myself an allowance every week, and I thought, woohoo, an extra $100 allowance or whatever. I don't know where it goes, but it's going on nicer things, man.
Yeah.
It's going on. It's not going on cigarettes, and I'm not having that little tweak of existential fear every morning when I get up and both incredibly enjoy my cigarette and think I really want to live.
Yes. Well done.
Yeah. When did you knock him on the head, man?
I had a weird relationship with smoking for a long time until.
Hang on, isn't that? Didn't we all?
Well, I don't know. Yeah. I think some people just smoke,
and
some people can just have one every 2 weeks with a couple of drinks. Like I know people who have a rule about purchasing cigarettes. They're only allowed to after they've had 3 drinks.
Yeah, but then the other people that drink every night.
Well, yeah, there's that as well.
Yeah.
I was on again, off again for a long time.
Yeah, your mistress.
Yeah. And then I'd kick it for ages, and then it kept being that. Well, I haven't had a cigarette in 6 months, so I'm sure it's totally fine for me to like just have a little bit when I've had a few drinks or whatever, and inevitably it would be, it never took long for me to suddenly find myself going, all right, well, I'm not getting out of bed until I've finished this cigarette.
Yeah, that's the one.
So I think really probably becoming a dad, to be honest. It was I don't want you to see me smoking.
Yeah.
And I want to be around.
You don't want to try and be ironic 80s dad.
No.
Yeah. I saw someone get in a car with a in Wellington with a cigarette over Christmas with a baby, like a kid in the back. And
wow.
It just felt like...
Dude.
It felt like... I don't know if you've seen F is for Family. Like, it felt like 30 or 40. I was
right.
like, wow, the world has changed. Since,
but it has.
You know?
It legitimately has, and I think that's interesting.
Well, I think that's part of a good... I mean, I disagree with the... I don't think the price hike is a good idea, especially for, someone who's earning fuck all, who's going to just scrape together nearly $30, rather than be able to afford a vape.
I agree. I don't think that's the answer.
But I was going to say, I think what New Zealand's done a good job at, that even when I'm back in Australia, I noticed hasn't really hit so hard, is it's actually kind of whack smoking in public here unless it's nighttime at a bar or whatever now.
Dude,
like the
totally.
social things changed, you know?
Yeah, I definitely think it's been reframed for a younger generation who don't look at it and see it as iconic and cool anymore, which is interesting because it was synonymous with James Dean and cool. Really? Forever.
Oh, look, me, James Dean, I wasn't even that old or that cool, dude. Like, me at 12, I feel like, could I take a lawsuit out with Slash for those posters?
Yeah, dude, totally. But of course.
They were my Marlboro Red.
But Slash is...
Marlboro Red, eh?
Slash
19,
is our generation's James Dean.
19, smoking a pack of Marlboro Red a day. Dude, anyway, we'll get off this topic. And I'll say last thing with that, you said, the people who can just... Like, one way or another, I know whether it's a gene or a predisposition or whatever, I'm under no illusions that I am of the addict disposition. Whereas, I don't know if you know, our old mate Jez used to do
yes,
Shehad's art and so on. I mean, he used to smoke like a bitch in jail with no radio, and he just stopped one day and just didn't understand when I couldn't. You know?
Yeah.
But I was the guy who used to worry about Jeremy smoking.
Yeah.
You know?
I forgot about Jez. Where's he?
He's my longest friend. In terms of, pretty much staying in touch the whole time, Dave. We met over Metallica and Metallica riffs and singing James quietly in his parents' room downstairs. We're about 14. Whereas he's back in Wellington. He is still doing coding rather than designing. He is doing stuff for the film industry, and he and I have started playing pinball quite seriously. So
Wonderful.
We bond over that.
Wonderful.
Anyway, I do these bios to introduce these, and they're normally quite cumbersome and long. And I just thought the first line of your LinkedIn was pretty choice. This is hey, by the way, it's like when you meet up with someone again after quite a few years. Is it not Dave anymore? Are we David? Are we Dave or David?
Either. There's a whole new group of people that only refer to me by my surname, which
Benge.
I find quite weird.
Are they like private school boys? Benge.
I always think it's a little bit familiar to just suddenly start calling people by their surnames. And I often, in correspondence, I'll often to someone who does that, I'll often reply with their surname, and then instantly the next email I get from them is like, "Hi, Dave." So I'm Dave, David, whatever.
Oh, no, you just kept signing off as David, and I was calling you Dave, and I got all...
I'm totally fine with it.
I overthought it. I think people who call each other by their surnames, I think of sort of boys' colleges
I agree.
and hazing. So anyway, David Benge, beautiful short line in and out. Started out playing in bands and ended up managing them, and I think I probably... witnessed at least part of that transition. This podcast often starts in the late 90s because some pretty cool stuff happened to me around then. I think some pretty cool stuff happened culturally, and I met some pretty cool people around active and around the music scene, people like yourself. I was really looking forward to having a chat to today. So yeah, how did that... I mean, because I met you... I would have graduated, and I was a bit more ensconced and active then, and you got the gig as... campus orientation gig, what do you call it, organiser? Which
campus
I'd imagine,
arts coordinator.
That was like a Mikey Havoc description. Which I'd imagine at the time, and at your age, was like a score, man. Were you stoked when you got it?
Yeah, I was. I mean, I dropped out of university and never finished my degree, which was hilarious because my degree was in religion, and I'm actually only like 6 I've got like one more paper to do that I could finish in 6 months, and I never finished it. But I joke about it. Kind of, I'm like, I wonder what the difference would have been if I'd finished. It's like I've worked in music and now over at Vice, but before Vice, I've worked in music my entire life.
Yeah.
I was like, I wonder what that degree in religion would have helped with. I'm not sure, but yeah, I got that. So basically, there's the way it worked was there was a student council, and you could vote. Or what is student council? Yeah, I guess Students Association.
Students Association.
And I don't know why I ran for those types of things, but I did. And you couldn't do the same portfolio twice. So the first year I was involved, I was elected, and I worked in campaigns. So it was like a political kind of portfolio. And then the next year...
That's right. You were a campus sort of activist stand on boards going.
Very
cool,
much
man.
so. Yeah, very much so. Got arrested multiple times. Spent time in holding cells. Had a trespass notice on Parliament grounds at one point, where we went back to protest the trespass notice that we received for protesting.
It's a very meta protest.
Yeah, it was. It was protest squared, post-protest.
And so there was a student council vote as to who would be, I think you were getting to who would be a campus arts coordinator.
Yes. So there was a campus arts coordinator was a paid position, but there was an assistant, really, that was on the council, on the Student Association.
Yeah.
So I was voted in again on my second year. Couldn't do campaigns again, so worked on campus arts. And I think so. I was like the bio says, I was playing in bands and thoroughly enjoying it. What I found was that I quite enjoyed kind of organising, and I enjoyed watching. I enjoyed being a part of something without being the focus, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
you're in the scene, but you don't have the pressure of the bright lights.
Yeah,
and you have a penchant for kind of organising and agitating and getting people together.
I got a serious kick out of watching and dare I say it, aiding or helping in certain circumstances other artists grow and develop, and watching these things come from these like small little places to varying degrees of success. I got a real kick out of.
And that was a real period of that in Wellington.
You felt like it.
The history books say that,
Yeah.
whatever style of music. There were
Totally.
lots of little things bubbling away that...
It was an exciting time,
Yeah.
and partly, no doubt, due to our age, but also there was some really cool shit happening then. I just noticed that there wasn't really a lot of other people that got a kick out of the managerial side of things. Like everybody wanted to be the lead guitarist or the singer or whatever,
the DJ,
the main MC. Yeah. And so I was kind of like, well, why don't I explore this a bit? So it was a weird set of circumstances though that I ended up applying for and getting the actual paid position. There was the person who had the job before me.
Liam?
No.
Marg?
Marg was there. So when I started, it was with Marg, and then she left, and then there was another guy came in and got the job after her. And basically, long story short, he had a heroin overdose, and he was trying to. It was a suicide attempt.
So he got through. He didn't. He didn't die.
He did get through, but he tried to take his life with an overdose on heroin. And so I was this. How old was I? 19, I guess. 19-year-old kid, grew up in a Christian family.
I was going to say, you didn't really come from a. Not many people did come from a background of experiencing something like that at the time, and we were pretty young.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting wake-up call to what else was going on in the life in the world.
But just sort of, I mean, I don't know anything about it in terms of, the Christian background and stuff, but sort of like ringing the folks and trying to sell them the fact that you've got.
Do you want the good news or the bad news?
No, it's like, I'm going to give this music industry thing a crack. And by the way, despite every terrible cliche that you might think, the boss overdosed on Downtown last night.
Yeah.
Anyway, so make light of that. But so you sort of ended up stepping into the role.
Well, so I was there. Yeah, I was there in a. I was waiting. It was kind of like a "we'll advertise this position" type thing.
Yeah.
Dave, can you do it in the meantime? And I kind of. I think it took them ages, and I ended up just going, look, I'll do this. Like, I'd like to do the job, and you should give me a crack because I've been doing it for the last 6 months, and I'm
best way to get a gig, man.
Yeah, and I got it, and I had a hell of a lot of fun. But through that process, I started managing artists. I got asked to manage a band that I remember very distinctly at the time saying, but I don't know how to manage a band. And the response from the band member was, well, who does in this country? And it was funny because back then, I feel like, I don't know, maybe it was my naivety, but there weren't a lot of artist managers around.
There wasn't. I mean, look, you and I have. I mean, I'm not saying there wasn't in the music industry beforehand, but things really changed in terms of there being a machine.
Genuinely did. Yeah, absolutely. So that was so. I got to this point where I was playing in a band, and I was managing a band, and I was working full time at the university. The band that I was managing were doing really well. They'd had certainly a number one single.
Well, I think you've got a sort of name drop at this point. The band. Who are you managing?
So this was Fur Patrol. This band, Fur Patrol. They'd had a platinum record, double platinum record, number one single, and a top 10 album. So it was kind of going very well for them, and I guess I wanted more. I'd grown up in Paraparumu, pretty small little spot, and
I did wonder where you sprouted from. So you were from the Wellington region. So you start managing Fur Patrol while you're doing the campus arts coordinator job, is that right?
Yeah.
Because that turned into a really long-term role for you, didn't it? And you followed them overseas and...
Yeah. I joined them before they'd recorded, or they were recording their record, their debut album. I joined them then. They'd already put out an EP. And funnily enough, I think one of the best learning curves for me.
I was going to say, coming back to that. So, how did you learn how to manage? Because it's no small. It's not like you're managing your flatmate's band. They were no small act.
Well, it was. They'd signed a questionable independent record deal. Who had then gone and done a deal with Warner Music. So, what happened is, it's your first run at it, and everything just works.
You can't even Google this shit to see what went before.
No, totally. In fact, I got my first ever email address was at Victoria University at the campus arts job, and I remember just being like, "Well, where the fuck? What do you do with an email address? Like, where did the letters go? Where do I file them? What's going on?"
So funny because around the same time, because QB was always quite forward thinking in that way. Mark from Active, on my business card there was an email address for my sales job, and I remember thinking exactly the same thing. Like, which machine in here does this come out of?
Dude, totally. And of course,
who do I give this to? Who can send me something?
But isn't it crazy that this is we're, as you said, we're pushing 40 / we're flirting around the edges of 40 either side.
I'm on the other side.
I'm almost there. But it's crazy that we neither of us knew what an email address was, and in our lifetime, this is how dramatically it's changed.
Oh, yeah.
It's insane. So basically, what happened is everything went very well for that band, and so I got to witness how things could work when they were really when it was just going right.
Yeah.
But I had a lot. I think to a degree, being young, I was 19, and I think what that really helped because all of the band members were older than me. Everybody I worked with was older than me.
Yeah.
So I didn't. I mean, I'd like to think I wouldn't have anyway, but I didn't approach any of it with this kind of arrogance that I think sometimes you can when everything's just working, and you're kind of like, this is me.
But I've never known that to be your disposition either way, man. And in fact, I think it's probably one of the things that's really helped you along is you're kind of not like that. I was going to say, I always remember you just being very, very helpful, very keen. In those early days, it sounds like I was 10 years older, which I wasn't. But so Fair Patrol at 19. So you just at the beginning of managing them. Before I get further into that, because I want to talk about going over to Australia and stuff, because a lot of bands around us made that pilgrimage at the time, for better or for worse. We had Shehad go over. I remember being in the midst of the sort of collapse of Weta, if only because I saw all the guys around Melbourne and consoled a few of them. I remember seeing, I know Fair Patrol went longer than that and so on, but just to backtrack a little bit because there's no there's no compulsory student union membership now, so that whole orientation thing has radically changed. And those few years that I was going to shows, before you turned on up when I was at uni as well, I just saw stuff that I just would never have seen otherwise. I saw from Yola Tango to African Head Charge to Damn Native to, da-da-da-da-da-da.
Dude,
what were the moments, this is just a bit of a, nostalgia moment, what were the moments with shows you did where you were just like, oh my fucking God?
There were multiple. I remember the moment, actually, vividly, that I was like, I want to be involved in the mechanisms of this outside of being on stage. I want to be involved in the guts of it. Was crowd surfing at a Belter Space show.
That was the fucking loudest show I've ever been to.
At the Union Hall. My first year orientation. And I was just like...
That was so loud.
Yeah, and so I was being exposed to this stuff that I laugh now because I talk to... you meet people... Like, oh yeah, I've been listening to the Velvet Underground since I was 3 years old.
No, you're like me. You're a suburban schlub.
But dude, totally. But also Christian, like Christian music. Yeah. I was like, dude, outside of like Snoop Dogg, I played basketball a lot. So there was there was some like Snoop and Warren G and Biggie and Park.
Yeah.
But outside of that, it was Christian rock and roll music and Christian heavy metal. Yeah. That was all I'd known. So I got to see these things.
Those lyrics are amazing. Oh, boy.
Yeah. I'd seen Supergroove play. As like a 16-year-old, but outside of that, the first show I saw,
all your senses were like gaping open, and you were just
completely.
Oh!
And seeing something like Belter Space playing as loud as they did, I think the 3Ds were on that bill as well. But it was just, I was just like, what the fuck? Like this is just a whole different thing.
And it's from New Zealand. Before coming back to what we said before there was sort of everything was a lot more. Overground, I guess. God, it sounds like you and I. That's so funny because I thought I sort of remember being similarly sort of wide-eyed and energetic and couldn't get enough. Like I got a similar thing, not through the campus arts thing, but just through meeting all these people who are active and being really like.
Yeah,
but my
totally.
thing there, because I was the grommet, but I was just like I was, how'd you put it? Like I had my music that I liked and my music I was buying and stuff, but I was totally open to talking to anyone older than me up there about what they're into.
Yeah.
Alt country. I'm like, what the hell is alt country? Da-da-da-da. I'm like 18 getting a scene, and then I meet Danny Lemon, and it's like, And all these people are just like, so just lovely people, but just that music, culture, art, that understanding of like, I don't know, man, even films I saw around then. There was just a whole lot of things that were just it sounds so
totally
cheesy,
agree.
like a cultural awakening.
I remember getting high and going to Kids with Sam Wicks.
I remember Fraser from Bodega up at Active. Probably didn't realise how young I was, 17 or 18, whatever it is. But I'm never been a big herb smoker, and he blew this joint with me on Saturday afternoon. I was so stoned. And I was doing my film degree at the time, so I went up to the library back when you get VHS tapes and stuff. and I watched Easy Riders on my own with headphones on, just like...
Yeah. What?
Yeah,
Dude,
you got
totally,
it.
totally.
Yeah, rainbows coming out the holes in my head.
It was an exciting time. I think somebody once said to me, actually, after, like, years later after I'd left the university, they were like, you really kind of fundamentally changed the way that people perceived orientation, because I also took it off campus. It had always been an on-campus thing, and it had always been like toga parties and yada yada yada. Yeah. But one year we had like Shellac, Super Grooves, Stereo Lab. Like it was.
I think there was always that. You had to cater for that kind of commerce student boat shoe business,
of course,
but that was only 1 or 2 nights.
But I really made sure that ratio was like not a lot of that.
You're in the campus arts coordinator office with the door jammed up, like
four
legs on
exactly. It's like, no, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, fuck, it was.
What do you mean you took it off campus? You started doing shows.
Well,
elsewhere.
We'd never been allowed to. I don't know if anybody had ever tried, but they had said that we simply couldn't do, like, you had to do the shows on campus.
Yeah.
And I was like, sure, but the Union Hall isn't really a great venue. And I wanted to put... So another moment, speaking of Shihad...
we weren't, but
Jez,
in our hearts we were.
I thought you...
In our riffs we were, bro.
Riffs. Yeah. But I... I knew of Shihad, but I just always thought they were like this... Really... Like, I knew of Churn, really. Yeah. So I was like, full-on metal band. I'm not a massive fan of metal. Probably not my cup of tea. But when Marg was doing orientation, or just might have even just been a mid-year gig, she had Shihad play, and I was working the gig, and I was like, I remember watching them play, and it was sold out, and I was just like, holy fuck, like, this is just not what I expected at all, and it's just mind-blowing. I mean, I remember it feeling similar to, that was on the Fish album tour, and I felt similar things to watching Fugazi play. It was brutal and like just extraordinary.
I'm preaching to the choir, but coming back to what you're saying about, the industry not being what it is now, I think what that band always knew, whether it was Gerald's influence or not, pre or post, was the fact that it was a full-scale rock and roll show.
Yeah.
So they always came in, even from early on, with everything...
It was big.
Ready, but, production, everything ready to go.
That's
Someone doing
what I mean.
the sound, all of that stuff. And, they used to be the band that... I mean, all said and done, I've talked to Aaron Goldman about this. They're probably the band I've seen the most over the years.
Right.
And I've never seen them miss, it's like a cliche term, I've never seen them miss a beat. I wasn't at the show where Phil ended up with a wine cast on his head backstage after that, but, they are that tight. They are that much of a machine.
Dude, so watching that show, so what I was like, Shihad need to be in a bigger venue than this, and I want to take it down into the city. So I convinced the good folk at whoever my bosses were at Vic, and the budgets people and the student council, that we would do a price for students, but we would do the Wellington Town Hall.
Good on you, brother.
And it was the biggest headline show she had ever done in their life to date at that point.
Nice.
And I remember Tom and I actually went and played Daytona car racing, Indy
Oh
500
shit! Just keep it in the era, Dave. Just keep it in the era.
But but to double or nothing on their fee, and Tom won. And then,
no, it didn't really happen.
And then he was like, no, I'm not going to hold you to that. I was like,
nice fella.
Thank Christ. But I remember that show. I remember because I think it was Fur Patrol and Weta opened for them.
I think I'm nerdy enough to remember that poster, mate. And I was at that show. Yeah,
it was a real celebration, because they who was it that came in? Somebody came in and looked on the floor, and then looked up and were like, whoa, like, I didn't realize that when this was sold out, you'd actually sold the seats as well. It was like, yeah, we did 21, if memory serves, 2,160 tickets was the capacity, I think.
Wow.
And so that was, we'd done 800 in the Union Hall before, but this was, so that allowed me to do, I did a Salmonella Dub gig there. I did Supergrass there.
I DJ'd that day.
Did you? There you go.
K-Tel.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Name.
You did. And I put Supergrass on with the D4 opening for Supergrass at the Town Hall too. So it allowed us to do more than had been done before, and it was again, it was a really exciting time.
So I'm going to get out of the halcyon days of the late 90s, which is a recurring theme on Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. But I want to go back a little bit because you mentioned it a few times, and I heard you talk about it on your RNZ mixtape as well. The sort of influence of quite a I'm guessing quite a the word staunch is the right word, but quite a enveloped Christian upbringing. Was it sort of at Catholic level where you sort of had to deal with guilt and stuff, changing into this music fella, or are your family quite sort of liberal, yet devout Christians?
So it was an interdenominational church. I think there definitely was guilt at times. I'd never smoked a cigarette. I might have been a little bit drunk one night after our basketball team won a championship.
Listening to bloody gin and juice.
Yeah, exactly.
Laid back with your mind on your money.
Money on my mind. And I'd never tried any drugs or anything. So there was like all of those rules being broken.
they're often quite standard parental rules as well, though, outside of the Christian thing. But
I don't know them under any format other than my upbringing. Yeah. And I did know other people who had parents. Like, in fact, there's a guy on my basketball team whose dad was like, all right, son, when he turned 16 or something, he was like, we're going to get high together, and like pulled out some weed. And so there was definitely different ways of approaching it. But I didn't feel... I had this moment doing this religious studies degree. And I had this moment where we visited a Hindu temple, and they handed out some food. And there's a passage in the Bible, essentially the idea of being...
Oh, well, you're deep, you know your scripture, right? Yeah.
Well, used to.
Yeah.
But there's a passage that says something along the lines of, if you're not for me, then you're against me, basically.
Yeah.
And the idea was that, like, having this food blessed by these pagan gods would be bad. And I actually said no. I was in first year university, and I said no to the food. And later in that day on that field trip, I witnessed people that were just so devout in their following and their worship of these gods, and I
at the temple, yeah,
in this Hindu temple, and I remember just having this moment, kind of where I was like, I can't reconcile this idea that these people who potentially, like, not taking it outside of Wellington, like go to a small remote village in the middle of India, and it's like, what if they just never met an English-speaking white person who told them that God was the one they were meant to be following? And so they've born and lived and died without the correct quote-unquote information, and therefore they've gone to hell.
The publicity machine that is the missionary movement, you mean?
And I was like, this is bullshit. Like, those people are praying to the same fucking thing, if anything. And
you know what's funny to me about this is, like, I mean, this is really basic separation of things, but you go from sort of religious based belief, knowing scripture, going to church every week and stuff, and it's like Dave's going to do tertiary study, so the family's going to tertiary study. Oh my God, they're teaching him critical thought.
Yeah, but that was 100%.
It's backfired.
And I think to a degree they were encouraging critical thought. I remember not quite finishing, but almost finishing my religious studies degree.
Who were encouraging it?
The university was.
Of course they were. That's what you go to university for.
Yeah, and I think that was fantastic. But what happened was, I remember that towards the end of the degree that I was finding that the questions I wanted to ask were the same questions that I'd been asking as a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
Things like, well, if God loves everybody, why is there war and famine?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, God works in mysterious ways. I was like, actually,
Yeah, but that's not
I'm not buying that anymore.
That's not the job of a religious studies academic. I remember there was that great guy there that Sam Wicks got very close to, and
Paul.
I did a religions paper, and I thought he was a fantastic lecturer.
He was my guy as well, because I studied Jesus and the followers of Christianity. And
So to cap that off, I think my grandmother, I mean, she's not going to go back and do it. She could if she wanted, but I think she's about the same as you. I think she's about a paper off a music degree from about 3 or 4 decades back. But I was going to say that you can always be a little retirement project, like you sort of get your beans going one morning in the corner of the garden, and then you listen to a little bit of talkback radio, and then you just chip away at a couple of essays for that last 6 credits.
Oh, look,
you have to ring up and say, do you still do credits? Oh, no, they're called... you need 42 shaboingas now.
Yeah.
That's all
totally.
you need. Yeah. Again, sort of fascinated about the upbringing, as I say, brought it up a few times. And for me, like religion or no religion, things are really good with me and my folks now. And they were never terribly treacherously bad, to be honest. But, I often say to people that not just me and a bunch of my friends, a lot of my 20s was about trying to sort of get as far away from my family as I could. And I don't mean like not going to family stuff and not being a good family member, but just... it was after 30 that I sort of started to, describe this sort of, I guess, more... You see what I'm getting? I sort of started to go, fuck, family is really important again.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm again saying with the religious thing, were your parents horrified at what the turn you took? Or, as I say, are they quite liberal
They're
Christians?
amazing. They're very...
That's what I'm saying. I don't want to rag on your
No,
family.
totally.
It's an interesting question when there's that much religion in a family.
Completely.
Yeah.
No, they're super intelligent. They love to talk things through. They're very, very supportive of the different things we've done. Mum once suggested that her 3 sons were like perfume, because she had one living in London, one living in Paris, and one living in New York. But she, they've definitely. I mean, I certainly don't think where I am today is where they envisaged it when I was a 14-year-old, and probably not what they wanted it to be when I was a 14-year-old. But to their credit, they're very proud of what we do now.
You were doing a BA majoring in religion. It could have gone anywhere.
Yeah, completely. And I started a law degree as well, but I quickly fell out of that. But so we've had some interesting conversations over the years. But again, I think the greatest thing about my parents is that we come back to that critical thought coupling that you said, and they are.
I'm an academic these days, David. Not Dave, David.
But they're fantastic with that, and they're open to discussion, and they want to keep learning and keep finding answers. So that's kind of.
So it sounds like they are take all the good bits about how you treat other people and the world, of the Bible, rather than the hellfire and brimstone.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been a journey. I remember there was a period of my life.
It's been a journey with my family, and there's no religion involved. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
Totally. I think it just is a journey.
Yeah.
A journey is a journey.
Yeah.
But I think we had this interesting. I remember this moment where Mum and Dad were kind of like, "Well, love the sinner, not the sin." When I first came back from university, one of my first
there'd been
breaks.
some sinning. Oh my Lord!
Love the sinner, not the sin.
Yeah.
And we were talking about homosexuality, and I remember saying to them very distinctly, because they had said to me at one point, "Look, you've got to forgive our parents, your grandparents, because they can be a little bit racist from time to time. But they grew up in a specific era, and this is just what they know and what they don't know." And I remember saying to Mum, I find it peculiar that I'm going to have to say to my kids, which I didn't have any intention of having at the time, I'm going to have to say to my kids, you'll have to forgive your grandparents. They're just out of touch when it comes to their thoughts on homosexuality, or the LGBTQI movement, I guess. And I remember Mum being kind of put out at the time, but again, very much to their credit, now they're like, look, we were wrong. We see no issue with that.
Your grandparents?
No, my parents have come back.
Oh,
and
sorry, I
kinda
didn't mean your... Oh, yeah, kids' grandparents. Sorry, I dipped out and came back in there. Yeah, look, I had a weird thing recently where it's totally a generational thing. Like, I'll get you... Okay, you get... No, you stay there. I'll keep talking. You grab a beer. I admire this man's... how do you pronounce that Jewish word? Chutzpah? I admire your chutzpah. Where's Sam Wicks or Aaron when you need them? Chutzpah. Aaron will listen to this. Not in his yarmulke. Did I pronounce that? Did I pronounce that correctly? Speaking of religion, yeah, I was at a family thing, extended family. My extended family extends about 6 people, but my what would you call him? My nana's brother, so my great uncle Stephen Fry was on the telly. And I was, I said I really like QI. Some people sort of hate it, and they hated it, and he hated it, and he said something about it. Oh, he's a dirty homo or something, isn't he? And I haven't heard that sort of. It's like when people say they hear nigger over in America or whatever. It's like I didn't think I was that not sensitive, but I was like, wow, man, I haven't heard that something that raw and like. And I actually went home afterwards. It was odd, man. It was odd, bro. It was
no, I feel you.
It was pretty odd because I didn't know that would come out of him. I've known him for
sure
40 years,
Dude, when I moved back to New Zealand from New York, I had a lengthy flight. I had to go via Australia for some reason. So it was like New York, LA, Melbourne, Auckland. And I was going to visit my daughter, who was in Tauranga at the time. And I had to get on this bus. So I was and I just moved my life back. I hadn't been to New Zealand. Hadn't lived in New Zealand for like 15, 16 years.
How long were you in Melbourne?
Melbourne was like 10 and then New York was
6
5.
or 7. Wow, 5, yeah. Anyway.
And I got this bus from Auckland Airport down to Tauranga, and I arrived in Tauranga, and I was just kind of shattered and jet lagged and everything, and I was just like, what the fuck's going on? And
New York to Tauranga. Hello, cultural clash.
Dude, it was amazing. Yeah. And the bus pulled out, and this car drove by, and this dude, this window unwound, and this dude just went, "Faggot!" And I was like, man, I just realised that I haven't heard that be yelled as a derogatory term for years, because in New York, people just didn't use that as a derogatory term. It was
not something you hear when you're coming out of a Williamsburg kale dispensary, is it?
No, certainly not.
Hey, I like it. It's we're up to nearly 40 minutes, and I loosely base this on people's bio. When the convo's good, we still are somehow not up to. So you went to Melbourne, the Fur Patrol thing. As I say, they did that pilgrimage. They had actually Warner's with a label, because I think there was interest from Warner's or signings for Weta.
Warner's
Fur Patrol. So my one question for all of that, sort of quite reductive, was just out of interest, did it all finish up because the music industry went, or was it sort of just a bunch of other things? Because I'd imagine just one day everyone woke up and there weren't records selling anymore.
I think it's a combination of things.
Still see Julia?
Yeah. We still see each other.
She's an incredibly talented woman. I'd love to have her on this.
You should. I'll hook it up for you. She'd do it. I'm sure she'd do it. She's got a really interesting story.
My brother's amazing too. Anyway, so what happened? Yeah, I mean, everyone was just like, it's been long enough.
I think it's a big combination of things. Moving, you move at a certain age, and you don't have kids, and it is 100% about the music, and you're happy to sleep on floors. And so what happened with Fur Patrol was basically they got fairly big in New Zealand at the time, and I was.
Yes, I love before you said, it's a band called Fur Patrol. Like people listening is like my mainly Guatemalan listenership will not get that. Anyway, sorry,
but So it did well here, and I was really trying to push the Australian label who had the rights to the record to do something, and they just didn't do anything. But But we, of our own accord, we kind of went over and started like pushing and got on some shows. In fact, Andrew Penman brought them over the first time for 3 shows.
Yeah.
We got a booking agent, and he hooked us up with the Dandy Warhols for 3 shows, and so we started kind of making these inroads, touring. And I realised
touring the Australian circuit.
Yeah, touring Australia to the point where we decided moving there made sense. Because it was still easy to come back to New Zealand and play shows and do tours. It wasn't that expensive. But
I got there on January 6, 2001. When did you get there?
Oh, God, it must have been very close to that same time.
Okay.
Like, very close.
Yep.
I think in the year 2000.
You came over to our flat when I was living with Aaron and Lou. I remember that one afternoon. Yeah, close to that. So lovely time in Melbourne, sort of bubbling up of wave of creative people moving on over before every second barista had double full sleeve tats and a very thick Kiwi accent. And you move over there.
And we I think we spent the first few nights in the Wetter house, and then I ended up moving
dealing with that crumbling amazing assemblage of talent. Yep,
totally. And then I ended up moving in with John and Tom into their place out in Brighton. And so I think what we realised was that the record deal we were in. So this is what I was saying before: is that the record deal was a great. Like the band did very well, so you don't question what the process is and how you could or should be doing things when everything's working, right? So we just kind of were like, oh, this is how it works. This is great. But then I started noticing, obviously, that it wasn't that easy at all and that it didn't work very well in Australia, and we had to figure out what we could do to change it. So I went back into the record contract and was like, this is really messed up record contract.
So hang on, because you referenced something before, the record company, when you say there's no interest, so there's no one on the ground for you in Australia. You're signed by paper, but there's no one going, fuck yeah, Fur Patrol are here, we'll try and...
Yeah, so if you sign with a major, it's, they're global companies and they've got offices everywhere. So they're like, I've signed you out of this territory, but the person who signs you in this country and is going to be, you can hold them accountable. It's like if things aren't working, you call them and you're like, you said this, you offered these
things. No one on the ground over there.
Well, but those people didn't even know we'd been signed. So why would they be? You can't hold somebody accountable who's like, man, I inherited this shit.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So you have to try and get them on board. And basically that just kind of didn't really happen. But so we went back into the contract and realised that it was a mess. Not the one with Warner's, the one with the independent label they'd signed. And so then the independent label did a deal with Warner's. So this is where I kind of learned how to be a manager. Is I had 6 months of legal battles of getting a band out of a contract, and
and so you're going to court and stuff, and
and the way we got them out of the contract taught me everything that you want to make sure is not put in a contract. I've worked the reverse way through it.
I know what you mean. So, those clauses are never going back in again.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least an understanding, like a deep understanding of why they're fundamentally flawed, and what you can negotiate on and what you can't, etc., etc. So we got out of that contract, but that took a period of time, and so the band were just kind of like unable to do anything over that period of time. They did some touring, but at the same time, in the belief that we were going to be successful, I started shopping them. The band were demoing, and I started shopping them to other labels. And so I ended up signing them directly to Universal Records in Australia.
Yeah, nice.
Off the back of some demos that were appreciated. It was amazing, actually. Side story, but a very funny one.
He really got a look of amazement on his face just then.
Oh, I just remembered this moment.
Halcyon days.
Well, I got on. I became quite good friends with the A&R guy for Universal Records, and we had this weird show once in Australia. We played this strange show in Melbourne, and there was this dude that was really what's his fucking name? He was the drummer in that band Icehouse, and he was managing this band.
Icehouse, like the 80s Icehouse.
Yeah, Paul Gilday.
I'd rather listen to Nice House than Icehouse.
And he physically, his band was supporting a band that I was managing, Cassette, Tom Watson's band.
Yep.
And he...
Craig Terrace's band.
Craig, yeah, that's true. That's more true. And the Bad Pennies was their name, and they played over time, and I kind of went up and was like, "Hey guys, you got to get off stage." And Paul Gilday threw me up against a wall,
Jesus.
physically pushed me. It was extraordinary. And I remember the words. He was like, "You'll never work in this town again." And anyway, so sorry, long story, but why that's very amusing is I became quite good friends with the A&R guy at Universal Records, and he ended up signing Fur Patrol. And one day he called me and he was like, "I've just received a demo from a band called the Bad Pennies." He's like, Did you tell me a story about how the guy said that you were never going to work in this town again or something?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Fucking
Yeah,
awesome.
that's exactly what happened. And he was like, "Cool." And he sent the package unopened back to to the manager with a note going, "I know Dave Benge."
Oh, Fano.
And that's all it said. It was just like, I'm not listening to it. I'm just, but that guy that will never work in this town again just cost you a record deal at Universal.
That's awesome. The machinations of the crazy major label stories, I've heard so many different versions of over the years in different countries and different scenarios and so on and so forth. When you were trying to get out of the contract, was part of the issue that, you'd been taken out for, the band had been taken out for sort of crayfish and clam breakfast and Dom Perignon, and it was all on their tab? Was there, is that something that happens to a lot of bands? Or was there a big debt,
Dude, there was the loosest...
That happens, right, eh?
Yeah.
The company takes you out and says, "Well, hey, yeah, fuck, we're making it, da-da-da," and you're all full of piss and vinegar as a band, and you don't realise it's going on your
Completely.
tab. That's so corrupt, man.
Completely. It's
corrupt.
It's really bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so was the debt dropped? Or?
The recoupable account. Yeah, I went into the office with them.
Sorry, you said there was a lot of loose stuff going on there. I want to hear that. This is, what's the word? It's good material.
I went into the office and sat down and was like, let's go through this line item by line item. And it was like, why is that a recoupable expense? Why is this? And the problem was that the contract was written in a way that essentially the dudes at the record label could have gone and bought a yacht. They didn't. But
was it full legalese as well?
Yeah, it was all very kosher. But this is the thing. You've basically, somebody comes up to a band and is like, "I want to do a deal with you." And the band are like, "Well, if you're going to pay for my record to get made." That was another thing that happened. So the record label they owned a recording studio.
Yeah.
And so they'd started a record label. But they owned the studio and they were charging the band time for it. But then it was also recoupable.
Oh my God.
From sales.
That's I can't think of the term. That's business wise.
Double dipping.
Murky. Yeah, double dipping.
and it's smart business if you can get away with it. But I just was like, hey, this isn't cool, and we're not into this, and you're taking advantage of this situation. And we were given questionable legal advice, and we need to renegotiate these terms. So that was the thing. That was the learning curve, But it was good. It was I learned the hard and interesting way.
So, does Fur Patrol split up and you stop managing them all around the same time?
Yeah. I mean, technically, I think I potentially still manage them. I don't think I ever stopped managing them. It's just a band kind of stopped doing things. So they.
Oh no, I wasn't insinuating anything happened between you and the band. I just
no, for sure.
Stop. Like what? Late mid 2000s, late 2000s.
Yeah. Mid 2000s. I think they had this second crack at it with a direct signing to a major label in Australia, their new home, and they had a fairly decent budget to make a record and a bunch of music videos and some tour support, and it was a proper crack at it all. And look, it just didn't work. It worked okay, but it didn't. It never became the band that everybody wanted it to be.
It's a shame it didn't pop off back in the day when you were first involved, late 90s and so on, because it's quite reductive, but it's how record industry looks at it. There was a a buzz in the air for kind of rock bands with female front people. As I say, I'm speaking from the industry perspective of looking at it, where a really great band could have jumped on that, you know.
Look, I think I don't know. I think Australia felt like the right move, but I think perhaps trying to look further afield might have helped in terms of the way that I would, if I could do it again, what I would have done. But you know, at that time, Shehard had moved to Australia. They'd been living there for about a year, and Weta had been, or maybe 2 years, and Weta had been there for like, not even that. Shehard had been there for about a year, and Weta had been there for about 6 months. This is pre-Datsuns and pre-D4, you know?
Yeah. Look, I loved Melbourne. I got to 30 and, having a good time, but I sort of realised I was sort of going around in circles and, regularly playing with my serotonin levels and, it's a great town to have a good time in.
Oh, dude, it's a hell of a lot of fun.
It's a young people's town.
Oh, I loved Melbourne, but when I left, I was ready to leave.
Last time I saw you over there, it was probably about 6 or 7 a.m. at Jake's, and you had a full bottle of red wine in one hand, and I probably had a record in the other. And so around that time, you start experimenting with sort of your own labels and stuff. You had Speak and Spell. On a rush through this because I want to get to Vice. What was Speak and Spell's kind of ting? What was your modus operandi with that?
So there's three of us owned it, a group of friends. It was actually the A&R guy from Universal Records that I'd become friends with, Dave Shrimpton. He so Fur Patrol kind of started fizzling out a little, and Dave called me and was like, I've got some news, and I was like, all right. He's like, I'm sorry, but I'm leaving Universal Records, and he was the guy that had signed us, and I was like, fuck, that's the beginning of the end, you know. It's like, all right, fair enough, but that sucks, but it is what it is. And he said, yeah, I'm gonna go start an independent record label with 2 of my friends, and I was like, oh, cool. I mean, that's, all power to you. That's exciting. And he was like, so one of them's, Johnny, this guy Johnny, and I was like, oh yeah, I've met him. He sounds like a great guy. And he was like, and you're the other guy. And I was like,
nice.
What? And he's like,
that phone call took a turn.
Do you want to start a record label with me? And I was it was a difficult one to talk to the band about, obviously, because it was like, hey, I know things haven't gone great, and that we're kind of wondering what you'll do for the next record. But the guy that signed you's left, and I'm starting an independent record label with him. But the idea of that was, this was around the time of like Franz Ferdinand, Interpol.
So it wasn't just local bands, you were looking internationally.
We didn't do any local bands.
I thought you cut off your hands for some reason.
We did. Yeah. We got there. We got 2 local bands.
Yeah. Great
but
bands.
it started out as we were like, for bands that were super hyped and that were in the middle of negotiating record deals, the way that we operated was we would come in and we'd be like, carve Australia and New Zealand out of the deal. Give us that territory.
Yeah.
You'll have a second revenue stream that won't be attached to your recoupable account. So anything that you do in America or the UK, like you sign $1 million deal and the shit doesn't work.
Yeah.
But you're still,
you got Australasia.
Well, you'll still earn money from this.
So I like to, thinking about it from an audience perspective, I often like to, talk about where bands are at with things like signings in terms of venue sizes. So you'd get them at Phil the Power Station size or bigger than that?
No, we'd get them at, like, legitimately at King's Arms size.
So that's smaller than the Power Station?
Yeah. Like 400 cap rooms.
Yeah.
Can sell out a 400 cap room. Everybody in the world wants a piece of you.
Yeah.
The business model was based on that.
Yeah.
It was like, is this going to work? Who knows?
Yeah.
But everybody wants a piece, and we're like, cool.
That venue ain't going to be empty. Yeah.
Well, and then they'd go and make the record. Like we were talking demo stages, or maybe they had a record they were shopping to everybody.
So would you guys get a percentage of sales in Australasia as well as the label? So it was sort of a business arrangement? Great,
totally.
man.
So and when it worked perfectly, the international company would sign them and pay for everything.
Yeah.
All of the assets, the videos, and the photo shoots in the record. And we would get all of that shit for free without having to pay for it. And then we could just do all the PR and marketing around it.
You're a franchise.
Yeah, kind of.
Awesome. And so that Speak and Spell went for a few years, and that finished on up. Any story there? So you went to, so it was like 2000. No, that's right. I emailed your Speak and Spell email address recently, and then realised I knew since then that there'd been this drunken piano thing. God, great names, bro. That's the Tom Waits reference, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Was it what's the line? The piano is
been drinking, not me. The piano has been drinking.
I might put that at the end of this podcast. Yeah. So Speak and Spell turns into Drunken Piano. That's a great transition.
Well, separate companies though. So Speak and Spell. I moved to New York. So Speak and Spell started out as a record label. Then we brought on touring, and became a kind of promoter as well. And then we included artist management. And so we signed Cut Off Your Hands to an artist management deal after I saw them play a show here when they were Nova Echo. And we, as their managers, we signed them to a deal with 679 Records in the UK, which is a division of Atlantic Records. And so they moved to the UK, and we carved out Australia and New Zealand so we could look after the records for Australia and New Zealand. So by the time I moved to New York with a band from Australia called Violent Soho that we'd signed to a management deal, specifically, and they so that was an interesting time. We signed them to management only. We didn't have the rights to the records, and we basically shopped them around. We went and did a week of shows in UK, a week of shows in LA, and a week of shows in New York. And we had a music lawyer working with us out of New York, who had connections with all the labels, and basically this one label was like, we really, really want to sign you, which was Motown Records.
The Motown Records.
The Motown Records.
Wanted to sign who?
This band called Violent Soho, which is quite weird because they're a heavy grunge band. But Motown had done a deal with Thurston
That is
Moore's.
odd. Yeah.
Well, they'd done a deal with Thurston Moore's record label, which was called Ecstatic Peace, and they wanted to do the deal with major label money.
Right, so in the Motown stable, but on the label that represents. So that sounds more
rock and roll.
That sounds more sensible. Yeah.
Label, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was after the New York show. So we did that, and we got the contract and we signed it, and that meant that we were moving to New York. So we all moved over there. And then whilst we were there,
I got to say that's living the dream for me, Dave. Like actually living in New York, man. And you seem like you would have just slotted right on in there. Were they great years, man? You know, I mean, aside from all the hard, you know, yakka and stuff. And
no, definitely
amazing.
I mean, I wouldn't say best years of my life because I've still got lots to go. Fingers crossed. But fucking great years.
Where are we time wise? I'm a bit of a sort of a sucker for carbon dating things. When did you live in New York?
I moved there when I was 30, I think, 31.
Oh God, you think in years? Are you thinking birth years? I think in like
dates. 2008.
Okay.
2008
2008
or 2000? No, 2007. 2007 or 2008. One of those 2 years.
Yeah.
So, which would have had me 29 or 30. And I remember the very first time I went to New York was in the around 2001, 2002. In fact, it was 2002 because my first trip was planned for 2001, and it was September, and then 9/11 happened.
Yeah, right.
So I pushed it back till May 2002, which is where and that trip was with a band called Two Lane Blacktop, which was Pip from Ladyhawk,
Yeah.
or Pip
I
who is
remember, I remember
Ladyhawk.
you pimping them. I found out about them through Sam Wicks telling me you were
Right.
over.
Yeah,
yeah.
they're a great band. But that was
Fucking
my
great
first,
name, man.
Yeah. That's such a great film.
Yeah.
So that trip, I remember getting out of a subway and on my first day, I guess we arrived at night and we went and drove to the hotel, stayed at the hotel. The next morning, I got up and went into the city on my own. And I remember getting out of the subway and just like getting up inside Manhattan and just being like,
Fuck yeah!
Oh, yeah, I was.
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
just
yeah.
absolutely overwhelmed with this rush of euphoria, and I was like, I feel like I'm home. Like this feels more comfortable to me than anything, and more right.
Then Parapara Umu.
Yeah, it just felt right.
Yeah.
It was like, this is perfect.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably the fourth time I've told the story on the podcast, but I got to London after Dublin, after the Red Bull Academy, and again, pre-internet and stuff. I certainly knew about the show. Someone had told me it was on, and someone had actually said, you should go to Notting Hill while you're there, the Carnival. Have you been to Carnival? He's over by the fridge now. Have you been to Carnival? Just signal one hand. Have you been to Notting Hill Carnival?
Venue or
No, it's a big, it's the biggest Afro-Caribbean street festival in the world in Notting Hill.
I have not.
And I had DJ the night before in Dublin, and I had, I was already sort of, the senses were heightened, and lo and behold, it was bank holiday, and so not only was I in London thinking every clock I saw in the taxi on the way in must be Big Ben. It's just honestly, like back then, media so minimal. I was thinking back to kids' books and stuff in the beginning of, not Coronation Street. Anyway, the story's going nowhere. I cried with joy at Carnival because it was so overwhelming, because it was all the music I'd kind of been buying and so on. So sort of pre-internet and stuff, I didn't have a lot of, all this knowledge I have now and stuff, but I was like, fuck, I'm right in the middle of this thing I have been in on the other side of the world, man. And
Dude,
it was, it's not trite, it's not cheesy, and it wasn't weeping inconsolably. It was there with my shades on, just going, oh my God.
Yeah, but it's such a far cry from Paraparumu or wherever you grew up.
Kilburnie, bro.
There you go. It's just like, it is a world apart. And the thing is, whilst it was pre-internet, what we did have and all we had were movies and
the facsimile,
television shows and stuff. And it's like, what did they depict? Like 99% of those depicted New York, London, LA.
Yeah, that's right.
Like,
we were
et cetera.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so when you're inside it, you're like, what is going on?
I was going to ask you about that a bit later, but a bit later is going to be pretty soon, man. It's been a good combo. It's well over an hour, 4 minutes over an hour. Still got 15 minutes, mate. You're contractually obliged. I don't want this to appear to sort of listeners and stuff to be me being negative about Auckland, but I came sort of back here because I needed to get away from Melbourne, and my folks had moved up here, and you go where the family is. And, to be honest, it's taken me years with Auckland. It's not the city that I would sort of choose romantically. But then I've thought about it with cities like New York and, when I was in New Orleans or back in Melbourne even and stuff, like, I'm pretty sure with my excitement levels can peak pretty easily. It's probably pretty good for me being here, because those cities would probably eat me up and I'd end up living like I was in my 20s again. What am I asking you? How do you like Auckland, Dave? Yeah. Have you had the similar sort of, long-term adjustment period, or did you just sort of get here and go, sweet, I'm busy, I'm back with my lady, life ticks on here?
No, I definitely struggled coming back. And I guess
But it's not coming back,
Dave,
because we didn't go to Wellington.
Exactly.
Or, that's a comfortable little Peter pocket,
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said before, New York to Tauranga, but New York to Auckland isn't really that different. Yeah, exactly. I remember flying that flight coming back in, like looking over at the airport, and I was like, this airport's on a goddamn farm. And I was like, New Zealand is just a farm on a beach. Like,
and then you drive back from the biggest airport in our biggest city, and it's just roadworks all the way through, and it's been like that for 10 years.
It's just, Anyway, I think
what I have learnt, taking over your answer, what I have learnt is Wellington serves and provides very easily in terms of feeling connected and finding crew and seeing crew and so on and so forth. I have learnt that there are spread about pockets of awesomeness in Auckland, and when you find them, you cling on to them. They're certainly not obvious in the middle of the city or whatever, and I've also discovered that getting out and around and about places like the Coromandel, that you don't holiday in the Coromandel when you're from Wellington. It's like, wow, there's all this amazing New Zealand. Scattered around the edges.
That was the answer I was basically heading towards, which is I'm a fan of places playing to their strengths. And New York City is a city. It's not like if you want. I mean, the beautiful thing about New York is if you want native bush and lakes and beaches, it's still only an hour's drive away. But nonetheless,
where's that? The Hamptons or something? Where?
Oh, you got just upstate New York. There's beautiful places up there. I've got friends who have a house up there, and it's insane. It's good. The wildlife out there is crazy. Like they have like bears and different animals. But anyway, my point is that I don't think New Zealand. Let's take it out of Auckland. I don't think New Zealand's strengths are cities. That's not what it does well. We don't have exciting, big, fuck-off cities. It's just we just don't have the population for it, and that just doesn't exist here. So that's totally fine. That doesn't mean you can't have a good time within the quote-unquote cities.
Yeah.
But I recently moved out with the family out to Tarangi, and that's been
everyone
amazing.
I know is ending up out west. Yeah,
cool.
cool.
Well, but it's beautiful. And
Beautiful.
And the funny thing is, if you've lived in a place like Melbourne or New York, the idea of a 25-minute, 30-minute commute isn't an issue.
When I was flatting in Cuba Street in Wellington, I thought people who lived in Hokkaido were in the burbs. Now when I'm back there, I walk, and it's like through the tunnel, and it's like 12 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever.
But exactly. But that's it. And it's like... Yeah.
It's a lush commute from Tarangi. It's not like you're on, stuck on
no
freeway.
Exactly. But everywhere in New Zealand's lush. My wife said that when I got back here, she said it took me about at least a year to stop going, holy shit, it's so green and so quiet. But it's funny, like I talk to people here who are like, oh, noise pollution's a real issue for me, like when they're talking about their housing, and I'm like, when I first got back, I couldn't deal with quiet. Like, it really stressed me out. I was like, I need to feel like there's something going on, or I'm getting stressed out. Like, I can pass out with the sound of a city around me because I feel like I'm a part of something that's alive. But when it's quiet, I get really unsettled. But that's changed.
I think you're
it's
saying
been 4 years
that if we weren't the generation we were born in the last 10 years, we probably would have either of us would have been medicated, as kids are now for not being able to sense. So you got married to Kate, your wife. It was. I found a sort of Women's Day-esque page with coverage of the wedding today, and that's because she's an ex Shortland Street star. Where'd you meet her, bro? Overseas or here?
I met her in New York. We'd been at a dinner here in Auckland, but I met her in New York properly. She was there. She had a film at the Tribeca Film Festival, and she'd never been to New York before, and a mutual friend was like, you guys should hang out, and we did, and we got on famously. And
was he matchmaking, or just said, hey, you should hang out with Dave?
I think I don't know.
Yeah,
I still don't know,
love those stories, man.
Honest.
You gotta love those friends. It's like, fuck, you changed my life, dude.
Yeah,
and I was having to a few of my friends. It's like, I love those stories, man.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And so I parted ways with the daughter of the mother of my daughter, and so my daughter was born in New York, but we'd kind of split up, and she'd, about the time I met Kate, she had decided to move to Tauranga.
Yeah.
And
Kate had.
No, my daughter's mother.
That's the next question I was going to say. Is she American? Are they still in the
No,
States?
she's in New Zealand.
Yep.
And so she she moved to Tauranga and was or visited Tauranga, and then kind of said, "Look, I'm not going to come back to New York." And so we'd split up, and then I met Kate, and Kate lived in New Zealand, and it was like, well, everything's kind of pointing towards Dave moving back to New Zealand, and the thought of moving back to live in Tauranga from New York just felt kind of impossible, or very, like, I just didn't know what I'd do. I was like, I didn't know what I'd do. Like, my entire life had been music. I was like, I don't think I can make a living in Tauranga off of music, and I don't know what else I'm qualified to do.
You've got the excommunicated drummer from AC/DC and New Zealand's most prominent New Zealand first. I know he's up north now, but yeah, Tauranga. I mean, I don't know much about Tauranga.
Not wrong with Tauranga.
I just thought I'd give it an unfair...
It is what it is.
I've had a few beers now. Oh, is that the time? An hour and 12. So great. So, okay, so your older daughter lives in Tauranga still, and so you obviously go back there.
So I pick her up from school every second Friday.
You drive all the way down there, bro? Wow.
I pick her up on Friday and I take her back here, and we hang out for the weekend, and then I drop her on the Sunday. And then during school holidays, I have her every week on, week off. And we have Kate's daughter week on, week off. So basically, every second weekend, we're a family of 4.
Modern families, bro.
Yeah. And then
awesome.
The next week, it's just Kate and I and our puppy.
That's great. Up and down time. So Vice, man, it's not an enigma. I mean, it's kind of an enigma to me. So, it was a magazine that started popping on up in Melbourne, which I enjoyed. And I sort of heard stories that it was started by a Canadian guy who was lucky enough to have a bit of sort of trust money, and he's built this media empire. And now there's enough purse that you're permanently employed in New Zealand, which is pretty amazing. Does that sound like some version of how Vice started and got so big? It's amazing. They've done really well.
But yeah, I didn't know about the trust fund thing, but potentially.
But it was Canadian based, and it was a guy with an idea, right?
Montreal, three dudes in Montreal who moved it down to New York City. It was originally called the Montreal Voice, and I think that the Village Voice had an issue with it, as far as I understand. Yeah, this is 96, 94.
Oh, I didn't see it till early 2000s. I reckon.
Well, that didn't exist outside of America until then.
Yes.
And then again, the internet wasn't as prevalent as it is today. So Australia was the third country in the world, if you include Canada and America as one territory. They started 94, 96. Can't remember which specific date. And then the UK started in 2002 as the...
I reckon Aussie started very soon after that, bro.
Australia started 3 months after that. And they were the third territory in the world. So what happened is I got back here and was like, what the fuck do I do with my life? All I've done and all I know is music and touring and record labels and artist development and management, and that's great, but how do you do that?
And sort of like when I had, not to put words in your mouth, but when I had Mikey from Loop on, I'd imagine, men of a certain age, you just don't want to be out in venues running around doing all that stuff anymore, living out Tauranga and stuff, eh? A bit of a lifestyle change?
Well, no. To be honest, like, if I could have made it work, if there were enough... Okay, so it's all about scale. 4.5 million or whatever the fuck it is here, 5 million, let's call it generously, people. If I like this album, and you'll know this, if I like this album or this record or this band, and there's 100 people that like it in this country, then it's like, cool, you can make this amount of money off of that project to pay your rent and provide for your family. Yeah. In America, there's 300 million people. So it's just a simple mathematical equation where you're like, that 100 people becomes whatever 5 million goes into 300 million. Ooh. But it's like there's heaps more.
Dude, my figures, this is a hobby, right? So my figures on this podcast, if my analytics are correct, and I don't fudge it and hit play heaps and stuff. I just see what comes on in because I have it connected to a pod tracking service. I have thought that more than once, that this hobby outside of my work could actually be deriving me income based on those stats. The people who are listening, that little pocket of, your fans as you can get these days, if I had that in LA numbers or London numbers, like a lot of the podcasts I listen to, it would be
substantial.
It wouldn't be certainly wouldn't be sort of, who's the ginger fellow with all the songs in the charts? It wouldn't be Ed Sheeran, but it would be it would be it would be a viable project.
Look,
yeah,
but
it's an interesting thing.
That's exactly it. So
Yeah.
I was like, I can't do what I've done. I can't do what all my training is for, and my life experience has brought me towards. So I can't do that. So what the fuck can I do? And I was working on Laneway Festival, and I guess I was kind of like, hey, all of these brands want to be involved with youth culture, and what do they do when Laneway Festival isn't happening? Because like, how else what do they do with under 35s? And
it's a big question in Auckland. What
Totally.
do they do?
So I called my friend Mikey, who was the guy that started Vice for Australasia, and went. I was just like, "What are you doing in New Zealand?" And
That's when all the Vice parties started here. That was you. That makes sense, bro.
yeah.
Right.
So I was just like, I want to start doing that here, and like, let's make it happen. And he gave me enough rope to hang myself, and so we've really kind of moved into this. The first kind of, and I think most substantial thing I did was hire local content creators.
Yeah.
So we actually established an editor, and then grew the editorial team, and now we have in-house video production and in-house, like, everything's in-house content. Creators, and so we're putting out documentaries. We've put out a couple.
The one that my
title.
friend Ursula was involved with, I was so happy for you guys to see that. See that flip over into an actual discussion in mainstream media that looks like it could be an agitation for change, because what's in the film is pretty indisputable.
Yeah,
and it's in the face of.
Well, look, and
people,
that's the idea. Is
it's a party pill doco, folks. Not party pill, excuse me. Sorry, synthetic cannabis doco, and it's really raw. It's not sort of gross or confronting. It is what it is. It's a bunch of cats talking about how that shit's taken over West Auckland, and that's
what we want it to be. Like, the idea is to tell stories that are equal parts. Curiosity and empathy. It's like, that's the idea. It's like, we want.
You don't want to exploit people.
Of course not.
Maybe the do's and don'ts arguably did that years ago, but it was all in good
Totally,
humour.
that's why it got killed.
Oh, did it? Okay.
Because it became exploitative.
Yeah.
But
it was always exploitative.
Yeah, exactly.
And I loved it.
And it was fun. But it was also pretty fucked up after a while. But no, I think the desire is to shine a torch on corners and pockets of society that mainstream media aren't discussing, and to do it in a way that mainstream media doesn't. Like, mainstream media kind of comes across as patronizing and judgmental. It's like, look at this drug addict and squalor, yada yada, and we're like, well, no, let's hang out with the drug addict and actually let's discuss how we ended up at this place and why this exists within the society. And we don't try to offer answers, I guess. We're not kind of like, this is the solution. It's more like let's create a moot point for kōrero and, like, get people fucking engaged.
You've inadvertently put forth a strong case for this podcast somehow getting under the Vice fold, David. So, look, I think we can nearly wrap it up. The last thing I wanted to ask with Vice that I was sort of getting to at the beginning, because it's a sort of recurring theme from my podcast, is like, there's grafters, there's passionate grafters in the entertainment industry who put shit on the line, and like you were saying when we were off mic, you were like, wow, I finally earned over this amount in my tax return for the first time in my adult life. So that's what I'm fascinated about, is how did Vice go from this sort of magazine kind of sprinkled around the world to the point where they've got sort of purse and the influence to have someone like you full-time on the other side of the world? You know, how did they essentially, do you know how they kind of cracked it, as it were? Just really huge internet hits.
I think it's just
Instagram followers, bro.
I think it's just telling stories in a meaningful and authentic way. And
Yes,
what
but
happens
that's
when
fine until the bills come in. So I'm saying, how have they monetized it so well that they can have...
But what happens with that is you get an authentic, organic audience.
Yeah.
Like it's like X brand can go and tell whatever stories they want with whatever high production values and put it on their website or Facebook or whatever. But who goes to check out what's happening at yada yada brand? You know, who's naturally going just to check up on the brand site?
The students I teach, I think. But yeah.
Right. Well, maybe some, but we, I think what happens when a publisher is telling these stories, you create a scenario, and what we did was we really focused on young people, which we define as kind of under the age of 35.
Yeah.
So, the Vice audience is 75% or almost 80% under the age of 35, and almost 75% of them access that through cell phones and mobile. So you've created and established this thing where you become a trustworthy source, right? Yeah. And so as soon as you become a trustworthy source, then when you work with brands, and it is advertising, but instead of it being like, hey, you should buy a digital banner on my website.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't we create content that actually gives the audience something more meaningful than just bashing them in the head with the thing.
It gives them some fucking credit as you know,
totally,
opposing thumbs. Human beings,
completely. And so we talk to brands about what it is they want to stand for. That isn't just the product. Yeah. It's like Levi's are a good example. You think of Levi's, you think of rock and roll, and you think of music. You think of Vans, you think of skateboarding. You think of Red Bull, you think of DJ culture and extreme sports. So it's like, but those are all brands that have done a great job of that. And so that's where we sit, is within that area where we want to work with brands to tell stories, but not the stories that often that brands themselves think are the stories they want to tell.
It's a great place to end. So listen, you've done 4 what my uncle used to call beery burps when I was 8, which I'm not going to edit out, and I nearly spilt that nearly empty beer on the computer, so it's probably time to go. But I just thought a nice way to end. I'm sort of woefully out of the loop. What's the music, Dave? What's the music? What's the music that I should, What's the music, mate? What's the music? What's the music that I should, after you go?
What should you listen to? New Zealand bands?
Well, I'm anywhere.
Anywhere.
Someone told me about the Sleaford Mods recently. A little bit late
They're
to that
interesting.
party. Yeah, I like them. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the new Destroyer record, Ken. I think that's a great record. On the local scene, I think this band Sere, S-E-R-E, mind blowing. Yeah. They're a fantastic band. Cool. And this group Heavy,
that's the fifth
but they just changed their name. Yeah. I don't know what they changed their name to. They were Heavy.
That's a great name. How come it hasn't been taken?
I don't know. Yeah. Well, maybe it has, because they just changed their name.
Yeah.
But they played at Auckland City Limits, and they're just fantastic.
Oh, so we're going to keep going now to 25. How was Grace Jones?
I was...
That's a short answer.
I could only watch a little bit because I was literally taking the kids out at that point. But she, A, was phenomenal, and B, the fact that woman is like... How old is she?
69. There's an album. There's an album that came out. Like, I don't know what she'd done between all the 70s and 80s business, but this album came out early mid 2000s out of nowhere, and as far as I know, she did nothing 90s, and it's really good. Yeah, and then she sort of disappears again and ends up headlining here. We have to go, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. Are you off back out to Lush Bush?
Heading back out to water and bush. and native birds.
It's been really cool, man.
Yeah,
All right.
back at you. Thank you.
Cheers.